Well, joining us, Paul Scully, the Conservative MP for Sutton and Cheam, who's also the Vice Chair of the Conservatives in London, and Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General and Conservative MP for Beaconsfield. Thank you both for being here. And our other guests remain with us too, because there is obviously plenty to chew over after what has been a pretty difficult week. First of all, I want to come to you, Paul. Yeah. You back Brexit, but you are now going to support the Prime Minister's deal when this comes back. Why is that? Because I'm not going to be a heroic loser about this. I think some of my colleagues are digging in the trench too far and not allowing anyone to pivot, to change their mind, to flex. And this is, as Bob said earlier, a really complicated issue. So I want to make sure that we can have a pragmatic, orderly way of leaving this, although there's clearly the challenge of how to get people to support this. This is the best way of doing it. But Dominic, do you agree?
I can't support the deal. I recognise the Prime Minister's done her best, but the deal is very different from what we were debating in 2016 in the referendum. And my view is that if people wish to leave on those terms, then they're going to have to vote for it. And that's why I want to have a people's vote, because we really are in danger of making a bad decision. If we pull ourselves out of the EU on these terms, my belief is that nobody will be satisfied with them. But how will a people's vote satisfy anybody? Because won't you just end up with a similar division? The divisions are going to continue. Suppose we leave on the basis of the Prime Minister's deal. All right, we leave on the 29th of March. That's the start of the process, not the end of it. Then we're going to have at least 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years of negotiation about our future relationship, which I'm afraid is going to be as divisive, if not more divisive, than what we've been debating so far. And the risk to us is that it tears us apart as a country. So I first to acknowledge that if you're going to have a second referendum, there is a divisive element to it. Of course I understand that, but I honestly think that it's better to do that and get an assurance that people know what they're doing and have made up their mind they want to leave in the way that is being presented to them and have the alternative to remain, rather than Parliament just pulling them out. But clearly, I mean, a referendum, as you say, will be divisive. It's all the people that actually said the last one was divisive. I'll tell you what, let's do it all again. It's likely to end up with vassal state versus cliff edge and not much light on the subject. But actually, what we haven't done particularly enough of is to explain what this actually does achieve. So I voted to leave the political institutions, to stop the membership fees, to end freedom of movement and start doing trade deals. You can't complete the trade deals, but everything else is included in this deal. But the problem is this, isn't it? I mean, you're in the same party, but you're clearly very divided on this. And I know that, Bob, you have a different view as well. So how is this all going to affect your support base when all they can see is that people, quite frankly, cannot agree? And you heard in the film there that people are just... The support base is as fractured as the party. And for that matter, the Labour Party is as fractured in its support base and within Parliament on this issue. It is a deeply divisive issue. I look at my own association. I can only make estimates. But you have your activists, you have your members, and then you have the people who vote for you at a general election and the Conservative supporters, even if they're not members of the association. I suspect that statistically, if you looked at those three groups, you would come up with totally different conclusions about Brexit. But Bob, that's the problem, isn't it? Yeah. Because when people are so divided, and you are not going to be able to gain any ground in London, where you really do need to as a party. Well, that's why I want to get the deal through. I mean, I approached it, unlike Paul, I voted to stay in the referendum, as you know, but again, I'm a pragmatic leaver, if you like, a Remainer now, because, you know, we're not going to achieve that, I think, without a great deal of division. For the reasons I set out about the need for business certainty, I'd rather have the deal than not, and the risk of further uncertainty with the referendum. But equally, as I've said, I couldn't countenance leaving without a deal. Dominic and I voted in Parliament to give Parliament a meaningful vote. We got some criticism for that, but we were right to do so, I believe. I think our colleagues need to come together and, if need be, work across party to get a solution to that. Now, that's the key thing I want to achieve. Rush and Ira, Dominic made the point that the Labour Party is split on this as well, from the top to the bottom. Well, the whole country is divided over Brexit. There's no getting away from that. But what we've seen is the Conservative Party introduce a no-confidence motion in the Prime Minister last week, having to pull the vote, you know, in complete chaos. Well, the Prime Minister won the confidence motion. Yeah, but there's been chaos, and they are in government, and you expect the government of the day to be able to lead, and that's not what's happened. What we are calling for is, well, I certainly am, and many other colleagues are, is that we consider the option of a people's vote, because the deal that is being put in front of us is the one. That is the Brexit that
ultimately this country is going to get. And that's what people should have the right to vote on. And the reality is that Parliament is, ideally it would have been better for Parliament to be able to settle this, but Theresa May never reached out to us, never reached out across parties to build a consensus.
There is talk that that's happening now, that some of the Cabinet are reaching out to Labour. Have you heard of that?
Now. Yes, I have heard that, but it's too late to build a consensus around a deal because she ruled out, her red lines were stupid, frankly. She ruled out staying in the single market or the customs union. Once you do that, then you leave yourself
staying in the single market and the customs union would not fulfil what a lot of people voted for in the referendum.
There is a majority in the House for remaining in the customs union and single market.
But
some sort of single market, let me finish, single market access. That was never contemplated by the Prime Minister. She set these artificial red lines without realising quite what she was getting herself.
I was going to say, Rachel, you know...
And that is why we're in this mess now.
But
the only way to get out of it is to have a public vote, as Dominic has said, because, frankly, if Parliament can't settle this, then the public should have the right to vote.
Come in there.
That's lovely words, but you know that your leadership just wants a general election. Frankly, Jeremy Corbyn could write his plan.
Because you guys are making a mess of
Jeremy Corbyn could write his plan out, should he have one, and actually give it to us, and then put it to a vote, and he'd still vote against it. Why? Because he just wants a general election. You've got the Liberals, you've got the SNP that just want to wish this never happened, which is why the focus is on the Conservative Party, because actually we are the only party that's trying to debate this in a reasonably sensible way.
But this applies both ways. If we're going to solve this problem as a Parliament, we have to come together and abandon some of our party dogmas. And at the moment, I have to say, Richard, Labour shows no sign in its leadership of understanding it. Some members of your shadow cabinet appear to, but others just appear to be blinkeredly obstructive. And until that happens, once that happens, things will start to shift, I think, quite quickly, and we will be able to achieve a better outcome for the people of this country.
Dominic, just let me ask this point. Have you or any of your colleagues been having conversations with Labour MPs to try and form some sort of cross-party consensus beyond the ruling bodies, beyond the Cabinet?
Of course, I've been talking to Labour colleagues for 12 months now, ever since it became quite apparent to me that we were in fact going to run into the sands. And once that became obvious, I've been talking to a number of Labour colleagues and happy to talk to many others. There's been a lot of cross-party discussion. It's been totally transparent. I mean, I do it usually sitting in the middle of Portcullis House. It's not in some secret room somewhere. I will talk to colleagues about how we find a way through this.
I think you asked a question earlier on, Alex, about London, how it's affecting London. I think London has a variety of views. It's always seen as a Remain city, but bearing in mind that more people voted to leave the EU than voted for the current mayor of London. So actually, there's still a big group of people around the city that we've got to work on this orderly departure, as I say, to try and satisfy as many people as we can, understanding that nobody is going to get everything they want. There is no perfect Brexit.
But there also is no, at the moment, we're in such a deadlock that there actually isn't an obvious solution that people can even rally round. So what is the practical next step now? Because even around this table, we have two people of opposite parties who support a people's vote and two people who support a deal.
To my mind, the first thing we've got to do is to come to a conclusion on the Prime Minister's deal. Now, I'll obviously listen on Monday to what she says, and where she appears to want to postpone this to mid-January. I have to say that troubles me very much. I can't see the point. Unless there's some significant change in the deal she's obtained, the first thing we've got to do is Parliament willing to support her deal?
Well, I've got a quiet Christmas, so I'm happy to pop back next week if you want to.
And I think we need to get that out of the way because the clock is ticking. Now, if we reject the deal, which at the moment looks quite likely, then we can start working to look at alternatives. Whereas at the moment what we're doing is simply displacing the time that we have to come to a conclusion on this.
Just bring Bob, you in there, Bob. If this deal falls, which does look likely at the moment, despite the fact you support it, what happens then?
Well, then I think Parliament should step up to the mark and perhaps do a series of procedural arrangements to have indicative votes which would set out the will of the majority of the House.
Test the options.
Basically. Absolutely. I think that would be a sensible way forward. That could include the Norway-type option, to which I've some sympathy and some attraction, though, again, it's not perfect, but that might be worth looking at. And if there was an impasse, the one thing I would not fall for would be either leaving without a deal or the Jeremy Corbyn tactic of trying to provoke a general election, which would do no good to anybody and would not solve anything. So that would then leave, perhaps, Dominic's option, which we would then have to consider. But the House should have the opportunity to go through all of those options.
Well, I'm glad to hear that Bob will support a public vote at that point. The important thing is that we avoid a no-deal Brexit, and that's why, as Dominic says, we need to get a move on, have this vote, clarify where the House is. There is no majority in the House for a no deal or in the country, and I think it's really important that we get on with it to avoid the no-deal situation and give the people the vote as soon as possible, because that's probably the only way we're going to get through this as a country.
Dominic, can I just ask you, what changes could possibly be made to this deal over the Christmas period that would enable you to support it?
I find it impossible to see what they might be. The difficulty is that the EU's indicated that the withdrawal and transition agreement, which is the only deal which is on offer, will not be tinkered with.
But some sort of legal reassurance around that backstop, could that do it?
Well, I find it very difficult to know. You're either going to change the text of the treaty to give us, the UK, a break clause, which they've refused to do, or it's not a break clause and it's just a review clause. These two things are clearly different, and if it is a review clause, for me, it's constitutionally unacceptable. And it highlights, I mean, I don't blame the Prime Minister, but it highlights the sort of morass into which you get when you try to pull out of one legal order and all you do is to get yourself involved in another.
So just very briefly, if I may, what's your prediction for the new year?
I think that whenever this vote comes back, unless the Prime Minister has been able to secure a break clause for the United Kingdom, I think this deal will be rejected.
Do you think that, Paul?
I think actually what worries me, so I started off saying not being a heroic loser. I think after Dominic's amendment a couple of weeks ago, it certainly makes a no-deal Brexit less likely. I think it actually makes no Brexit at all much more likely. And that really worries me. And so I'm determined. I think the Prime Minister's right to extend the time to actually have as much talks with the EU as possible.
Predictions, very briefly. Rashanara.
I think we're going to have to suspend Article 50. We're going to have to create space and time to be able to move to the next phase, and I think we will head towards a public vote.
Bob, very briefly.
Like Dominic, I'm a lawyer, but I'm of the view that she may yet be able to come up with some legal texts and formulas that can make it acceptable. I hope that she can. As I say, after that, then Parliament has got to step up to the mark and solve this solution for everybody's sake.
Well, we will be watching very closely. Thank you to all of you. I'm sure we will talk about this again in future. But for now, new government figures released this week show that the number of households living in temporary housing in the capital is at its highest in a decade. It comes as campaigners are warning that homelessness crisis in London is worsening. But is the problem being overshadowed by a different kind of political crisis? Bhavani Vadi reports.
Now, when we leave here in the evenings, we're stepping